the whole issue, you see, of phenomena that don't fit into the mainstream became a central concern of mine. So what I'm going to do in this talk, which I hope will be brief because I want to interact with people, is map for you a picture of what I call snapshots of our future evolution, snapshots of our future humanity, so to speak. I'm not the only one that saw the whole range of miracles in the paranormal as a sign of the evolutionary potential of human beings. Some of the early English psychical researchers were preoccupied with that idea. And since that is a scientific idea, it's all the more reason why we need to pay attention to these extraordinary phenomena. They're telling us something about who we are and what we may become.
Welcome to Caritas Consciousness Project. I'm Gloria Guidu, and Caritas is dedicated to promoting the evolution of consciousness as the key to individual growth and global healing. We draw from a wide assortment of both ancient wisdom and leading-edge studies in science, consciousness, spirituality, healing, and philosophy. And in addition to our online presentations with guest speakers, we also offer classes and study groups that are also online. And we have over 100 video recordings on our YouTube channel, Caritas Consciousness Project, and also accessible through our website, caritascenter.org. As a nonprofit organization, we rely on the support of our members and donors to keep Caritas going. So if you'd like to support our program, you can make a donation or become a member on our website. And now let me introduce tonight's guest speaker. Michael Grosso studied classics and obtained his Ph.D. in philosophy from Columbia University. He has taught philosophy and the humanities at CUNY, New Jersey City University, Kennedy University, and others. Due to his own unusual experiences, he had focused on philosophy of mind with an emphasis on phenomena and human experience at odds with mainstream materialist trends. He has published 8 books, including his latest one, which I just finished reading. It's wonderful, wonderful book, Smile of the Universe, Miracles in an Age of Disbelief. Just fascinating. I mean, it took me so long to get through one page because it's so chock full of interesting facts and just really, really great. Michael's current focus is on exploring ways to tap into the deeper creative reserves of our mental life. So welcome, Michael, and thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. Let me here first. I feel that right now, given the very troubled state of the world, the kind of research I've been doing about consciousness and how people can change is especially important. Now, as you pointed out, I'm a philosopher by training, and one of the main challenges of philosophy involves a study of the mind-body problem. So when I was at Columbia University, most folks were pretty much ready to toe the line about materialism, and I recall distinctly mentioning to one of my fellow students that I had a psychic experience once, and actually I had many. And he looked at me and he said, "That's impossible. That would imply dualism." And I said, And I said, that's ridiculous because I had this experience. And at that time, I didn't know very much about it, about the subject. And that launched me into an investigation of parapsychology and also ufology, because it turns out that I've had a lot of very unusual experiences, including an encounter in 1971 with a UFO, which had religious connotations. And I've had all kinds of psychic experiences, even while I was teaching philosophy. And it turned out that I have to say that I learned an awful lot from my students because I taught a course. And whenever I talked about the mind-body problem, I introduced the concept of miracles. I'm going to define that in a second, or paranormal phenomena, which challenges the mainstream view. So let me begin by defining what I mean by miracle in this book, Smile of the Universe. Now, smile, because the word miracle, if you trace it back to its Sanskrit roots, it goes back to SMI, where we get the word smile. So a miracle is something that makes us sort of smile with wonder, and that's how I would interpret it, or astonishment. So the whole issue, you see, of phenomena that don't fit into the mainstream became a central concern of mine. So what I'm going to do in this talk, which I hope will be brief because I want to interact with people, is map for you a picture of what I call snapshots of our future evolution, snapshots of our future humanity, so to speak. I'm not the only one that saw the whole range of miracles in the paranormal as a sign of the evolutionary potential of human beings. Some of the early English psychical researchers were preoccupied with that idea. And since that is a scientific idea, it's all the more reason why we need to pay attention to these extraordinary phenomena. They're telling us something about who we are and what we may become. So I'm going to begin with like a map of our mental or psycho-spiritual, I like that combined word, potential, okay? And this will have two parts. So the two classes of phenomena that I cover in my book, and I'm going to summarize very concisely for you now, are the mental and the physical. So there are mental capacities and there are physical capacities that I believe, and I'm not alone in this belief, after all my research, that is a part of human potential. And most of us, these abilities are latent. They're asleep in us. It takes special kinds of circumstances to wake them up and activate them. And I hope to talk about that a little later on. But let me begin by simply listing the different types of psychic, or if you will, miraculous manifestation. By the way, some of the more ordinary forms of ESP, or extrasensory perception, would be a little hard to call miracles. Every now and then I have and I'm sure most of us do, have a little telepathic interaction with somebody, a sense that we've connected with them mentally. But these things are perhaps a little too slight to characterize as miracles. But the essence of what I'm focusing on are phenomena that cannot be explained physically. The miracles are those phenomena that are quite dramatic. Unlike the ordinary, everyday, mundane, let's say, experiences of telepathy that we might have, or occasionally precognition. But let me just go through this two-sided model, and I will list these different functions. And as I do so, I would like to invite you to imagine what it would be like to have these abilities. In other words, my hypothesis is that we have these abilities because they are somehow liable to evolve and develop and fully manifest. We don't know the conditions how that might take place on a large scale. That's an interesting thing that I might have something to say about. It may simply be that the challenge is for us to educate ourselves to the point of liberating our inner psycho-spiritual potential. And in a way, that's what the yogis and the saints and the shamans do in the way they prepare themselves. Whereas ordinary folks like myself now and then have these spontaneous experiences. Okay, so the first I'll talk a little bit about the mental side of these evolutionary potential capacities that we have. I'll begin with clairvoyance, which is an ordinary French word which simply means clear seeing. And imagine now if we did acquire the ability to be clairvoyant, what that would entail is a wider awareness of the events taking place around us, a visual awareness, as well as other sensory modalities might come into play. But I can imagine a point of our evolution where we become increasingly clairvoyant, so that, for example, let's say you're living in a certain house and you're in a receptive mood, and it becomes rather natural to pick up on things that are occurring near you. And let's say you get an impression that your neighbor is being robbed, let's say, that would sort of enhance, you see, your ability to function socially, the capacity to be clairvoyant. For example, there's a famous story of Swedenborg, the famous psychic, who was far away from his house and giving a talk somewhere, and suddenly he stopped and he had a clairvoyant impression of his house being on fire. And so he stopped immediately and went back home. It was miles away from his home, and was able to deal with the problem. So I can imagine our developing this type of capacity would make a huge difference in the way we lived. We'll talk about whether or not it's likely this will happen or how we can bring it about, but I want to just get us to imagine what it would be like if we synchronistically began to develop all of our psychic powers. It would be a very interesting world that would emerge. Okay, so, and the other thing to say about clairvoyance is that it deals with the transcendence of space, because as we'll see, both space and time in the context of the paranormal are reduced. We're less confined, less constrained by space and time. Now, so speaking of time, let me say something then about pre and retro cognition. This is another aspect of the paranormal. And obviously it involves time. And imagine if we had a greater sensibility, temporal awareness, both forward in time and backwards in time. That would alter our lives in many ways. So let me give one example of my own, of a precognitive experience that I have. I used to teach a course when I was teaching philosophy in psychic phenomena. And one day, this was in 1981, I had a dream of Ronald Reagan being shot. And within a week, I had 3 dreams about Ronald Reagan. The first 2 dreams, I see him shot and he goes down. The third dream, I see him naked from the waist up, beaming with health. Well, that was impressive. I rarely have three dreams in a row that speak to a particular theme. And I kind of forgot about it. And about 2 weeks later, oh, by the way, I mentioned these dreams to my students. I just let them know on the wild chance that something might happen. They would be my witnesses that I had those impressions. And so indeed, within about 2 weeks later, I got a telephone call from one of my students, breathlessly saying, Dr. Grosso, you're a psychic. The president has been shot. And I remember the first thing that I said was, but he's going to be all right, because I have remembered that third dream where I saw him beaming in health, with health. And sure enough, I was right about that. If you may recall, the president was pretty impressively managed to recover from that. So again, that's quite a mysterious thing, right? To have, of all of the paranormal phenomena, precognition really is a challenge to logic. It forces us to rethink the meaning of time. And it's a very powerful and almost shocking phenomenon to experience. So that's the second on our map of the mental faculties. Now, the third capacity that I want to mention here, of course, is telepathy. I mentioned telepathy last because in a way it's the most important. If we are trying to imagine the possible evolution of human beings toward a greater and more humane and more sensitive mode of being on Earth, surely telepathy, which would enable us to tune into the minds and the feelings and the experiences of other people, would be a powerful device for getting along better, because we would be more sensitive to each other. And in particular, the aspect of telepathy that interests me is another word with the word pathy in it. And the word, of course, is empathy. Because the deeper levels of telepathic awareness tend to bleed over into empathy. Now, empathy, unlike mere telepathy, enables you to get inside the person's mind and see from their point of view what is going on. Now, it turns out that the near-death experience, which is a very important psychophysical phenomenon, one of the common elements of the near-death experience, I'm sure you probably may be familiar with this. If you've heard, I'm sure you will know about the near-death experience. But one of the features of the near-death experience is to have an empathic relationship to the people that are seen in the life review. As you may recall, if you've ever read about near-death experiences, that's one of the things that happens. People relive their lives and they re-experience all the people and maybe animals and situations they've been in. And one of the features is that they get this very deep form of telepathy where they're able to experience and view the people they've interacted with from their point of view, not from the person who's having the near-death experience. And invariably, and I should mention, by the way, that my friend and colleague, Ken Ring, has really emphasized this. He's one of the early founders of the research into this field. He really points out the importance of the near-death experience as a mode of evolving the consciousness that we sorely lack, I'm afraid, too much of the time, of the sensitivity to get inside other people and feel how we are acting, how we are impacting upon them in our relationship to them. I know myself, I'm constantly interacting with people, and rarely do I get beyond the surface? Some people whom I know well, or certain times where I'm in a perceptive mood, I may get to the point where I can grasp their inner reality. But again, I ask you and invite you to imagine what it would be like if we had not merely a heightened telepathic sensitivity to all life around us, but if we got deeply into the reality of the inner reality of the person that we're communing with or interacting with. So that if a person, let's say, is nasty with you for some reason, and you get it, and you can kind of see why and how they have felt interacting with you, you see. Whereas that's something that we rarely think of, when we're interacting with people. So I think that this is a very important aspect of telepathy. And there's another feature of telepathy that is sensed also in the near-death experience or the mystical experience, and that is a much broader dimension of sensitivity, where we tend to experience the oneness of mind, or the oneness of the universe. It's not just an individual person, but we know from, again, the near-death experience and from mystical experiences and from certain kinds of very, very profound telepathic experiences that people walk away with a sense of communion with the entire universe, with all living nature, and with all temporal and spatial dimensions encompassed. So that's quite a magnificent experience, and I have to say I've not had that one. I've had the smaller, junior, so to speak, ESP encounters, but I have not had a near-death experience with that kind of profound perception of reality. So, okay, so that's again, something to think about. If we had heightened telepathic ability, how that would impact on our lives as teachers, as politicians, as parents, as students of anything. It would add a whole new dimension. See? So again, my assumption is, I have to come back and say this again now, that these phenomena that we have, and there's vast quantities of it, and the mainstream scientists don't want to pay attention to it, and we can talk about that if you like. Why? I don't know. It's puzzling. But if we were to start to consciously focus on ways to evolve these abilities, latent abilities with us, something that we need to do, especially at this stage of our evolution as a species. After all, I mean, the world is becoming more and more dangerous in so many different ways, and wars everywhere, crime everywhere, and a heightened, expanded sense of consciousness is the thing, whether by some global miracle or new form of education. I'm arguing that that's something we should pay close attention to because of its potential benefits for humankind as a whole, and especially for our species at this moment of our evolution, which is fraught with danger, fraught with global catastrophic dangers. I mean, I don't want to sound like a crazy prophet here. It's not prophecy, it's fact. Between the threat of climate catastrophe and the increasing danger of nuclear war, the scientific groups there that put out they have put the doomsday clock at 90 seconds before midnight. It's the closest it's ever been since 1945, when they invented this diabolical instrument of mass murder, the atomic bomb. So it's in this context that I'm trying to explore our human potentialities. We're at a critical juncture in the history of our species, and we need to educate ourselves to new forms of consciousness, one way or another. And it's not going to happen unless we do the homework of acknowledging the possibilities, the potentialities. Anyway, those are my comments on the mental capacities that are latent, I believe, in us all. And I'm hypothesizing that there may be circumstances, there may be ways in which we can accelerate the unfolding of these extraordinary mental capacities. So now let me say that in addition to our mental capacities expanding, there's a lot of evidence pointing to our physical capacities, which are, by the way, rooted in the mind. But what I've spoken of until now are just mind on mind, so to speak. But the big issue and another big aspect of our map of human potential, psychophysical potential, is so-called psychokinesis or telekinesis. All those words mean basically mind over matter. That's the popular expression. Yes, psychokinesis meaning movement. Okay, so I have here four components of the psychokinetic potential that is tons of evidence, by the way, to prove that these things are real. You wouldn't believe it because mainstream science doesn't want to hear about it, but there are people that are concerned. So the first thing that I'll mention are healing. I mean, we can all immediately respond to the hope or the idea that we may possess extraordinary healing powers. And there's all kinds of stories from saints, from shamans, from ordinary people about extraordinary healing abilities. So let me begin by just pointing out the most common illustration of the healing power of the mind is the placebo effect, which haunts all of the scientific research into testing whether or not drugs work or some other healing procedures. They always put in a non-active drug, like not a drug at all, but something like sugar or just plain water. And they tell patients, we're testing, see whether or not this is going to have an effect on you. And in virtually all tests, there's always a significant number of people who, just by believing and anticipating and expecting that they have been given something that's going to heal them, they show demonstrable effects that are helpful and healing. The case that I find so interesting is the studies that were made of depression. It turns out that the placebo is just as effective as most of the drugs they use to reduce depression. That tells us an awful lot. So the challenge here is to learn how to anticipate, hope, believe. I mean, these are tricky things. How do you form your mental attitude toward the world and toward your condition in such a way that you can liberate your own healing abilities? But this is something we can study. And I'm not saying we shouldn't use drugs when we need them to heal. The other day, I rarely use an ibuprofen. I got a headache and listening to the radio, and I used that and got rid of it. I rarely get headaches, but now and then, okay, I took it. I could have sat there and meditated and gotten rid of the headache, frankly, but I was in a hurry. So healing then is a major thing. Let me just tell you, I want to give you one dramatic example. And this was a healing a miracle healing that took place in the presence of a statue of the Virgin Mary. Now, there are a lot of Marian visions of psychic phenomena there, by the way. But in this case, it was I think a Dutchman by the name of Pierre de Rude. It was one of the most famous cases of healing through contact with a saint and prayer. Pierre was a poor man working for a rich man, and one day a tree fell on him somehow, and he broke his left leg, and it broke in a way that it did not heal for 8 years, and he suffered. It festered. I mean, they had some pretty good doctors there, and the people who took care of him got the best doctors that they could find to help this man. He was a lovely man, and he had a family, and he worked for these well-off people, and they did everything to help him. Nothing worked. He, however, had the desire to go pay a visit to one of the Mary shrines, and he was unable to do it for 8 years. He just didn't have the money, and the man who was paying for his life, supporting him, didn't believe that this would make any difference. But after 8 years, he somehow set it up so he was able to go with his wife and a cane, hobbling. He hobbled. By the way, everybody in town knew the condition of this man. They absolutely knew. And they all liked him. He's a sweet, lovely man. They felt sorry for him. All the doctors in town knew about him. So finally he gets a chance to go, and he goes and in Ustaka, where there was a statue of the Virgin Mary. And that was enough for him, because all he had to do was say his prayer. And it's described beautifully. He finally gets there. He's dragging himself with his cane. And his wife is helping him along, and he's suffering, and he's in pain. And he says a very short prayer to the Virgin. And he says, I just want to get well so I can take care of my family. I mean, what could be humbler and more beautiful in a way, and more simple? Well, here's the fact. Instantly, it didn't take 1 second, he was completely healed. Now, he just dropped the cane, and he went back with his wife. The entire town blew their minds. He was known. Absolutely, everybody knew this guy was a cripple, and his body was it was the way his body was in a condition, the way it was before he had the accident. And by the way, this became a cause célèbre, and people all over Europe heard about this. And the anti-clericals, the anti-religious people, insisted it was baloney, it was lying, it was fake, he wasn't really sick. All the doctors came out and supported him. It was quite a story, actually. And there's a lot of books written about the after effects of this miracle. And at any rate, it's a wonderful story and an illustration of a power that is beyond anything that we would call a mere placebo, where there are relatively minor but significant effects. But a total instantaneous healing, that deserves to be called a miracle, something that's totally astonishing. All right, so healing, that's one area. By the way, PK, it can occur in so many different ways. I plan to write an article just about the incredible variety of ways that the mind can interact with the body or with the physical objects outside oneself in ways that it's so nuanced and various. It's quite amazing. But I will give you one example that I wrote 2 books about St. Joseph of Cupertino, Catholic mystic, famous throughout Europe as being the levitator par excellence. This guy was flying all over the place all the time. And I'll tell you this, if you want to know how to do it, the answer is quite simple. Go into ecstasy. This was an ecstatic. This man By the way, when they first encountered him, they thought he was simple-minded, and he wasn't at all. But he was so absorbed in his meditations and his ecstatic love of particularly the Madonna. In fact, the first time he flew was when he was staring at a painting of the Madonna. She really got him off into the air every time he encountered either talking about her or seeing a statue or whatever. So anyway, this is levitation. There are many records of particularly among saints and yogis. I mean, it's widely reported. And in my book, I have the references. If anybody wants to really get into the facts and see what's going on, there's tons of evidence. In the case of St. Joseph, there's at least 150 sworn depositions over the course of 35 years of his life where he was in the priesthood and levitating all over the place. They had to get rid of him because wherever he was, if someone said something that turned him on, he'd go up in the air and there'd be a riot around him. And no one could, and also when he said mass, suddenly people would notice that he was about 3 inches off the ground and they'd get all excited, you see. I'll tell you something about Joseph that's funny, and I meant to mention it about telepathy. He had it in spades, Giuseppe. And I'll tell you why. He was so open to what was going on in other people's minds that his brethren, fellow monks, and superiors got annoyed with him because he would catch you. He'd say, "Hey, you're thinking of having lunch and you're not doing a good job doing your praying right now, are you? Your mind's wandering and you're thinking about the garzon, so eventually his superiors said, "Joseph, would you mind cooling it a little bit?" And they ordered him. And by the way, Joseph, if they gave him an order, that was it. Till death, he would never disobey because that would be his ego. He had to get rid of his ego. But I think that's rather a funny story that he was so sensitive and psychic and tuned in that people said, "Turn it off, buddy." It was mostly minor stuff. It's not like he caught somebody that committed some serious crime. But anyway, so levitation. Now I'm fascinated by levitation because I'm also interested in ufology. And if you know anything about alien abductions, which are widespread, it's a big phenomenon. The aliens that abduct people, they seem to levitate all over the place. They grab you and they take you up. You're like air into wherever they take you. That's a question because it looks like a craft, but it may not be a craft, but we won't get into that. My suspicion is that if there are other individuals in the universe beside the human species, older and more evolved, that something like levitation is probably already been mastered. It sure would help the transportation problem on Earth. We wouldn't have to burn so much energy. This might be the answer, you see, to the climate crisis that we're facing. If by some miracle, would have to be, there was a breakthrough understanding of how to conduct levitational processes. The energy, whatever that energy is, it's real. And by the way, Joseph was not the only. There's all kinds of stories, but I'm not going to go into them all. But the ability to defy gravity and move around independently of the constraints of gravity, if that could be mastered, that would just transform life on Earth. If transportation could be affected by means of this mysterious psychic power, that would be a major event in the history of our species. Now, I'm sure most mainstream, materialists would just laugh at what I'm saying, But if levitation is a reality, and I'm positive that it is, that means there's a power there. We have yet to learn how to exploit it more creatively. All right, so that's the second item of now, and there are variations related to levitation. For example, there are a thing called apports. Apports really fascinate me. And you find a lot of apports taking place with physical mediums. And what it consists of is physical objects going through physical objects. And again, there are countless compelling stories demonstrating the reality of apports. And that sounds like pure magic, right? I mean, really, levitation is pretty cool. But to be able to go right through physical objects, you find that in the poltergeist phenomena, totally fascinating phenomenon. There's all kinds of poltergeists. And one of the things that's almost commonplace with poltergeists is objects like stones going right through the rooftop and landing in your house, and then vanishing, reappearing. And by the way, I just thought of a story that's close to that I'll share very quickly of my own. But this is a type of apport. It's more likely described as dematerialization. I had a student whose house was haunted by a very nasty ghost. So one thing I did, I'm going to mention that in a minute, but there's something else I want to mention right now. I had the impression I call this the dirty old ghost, because they like to show up in the toilet, in the bathroom when the girls are taking showers. Girls. And so I said, look, I want to put a picture of Padre Pio right in the space where the ghost appeared. Maybe that'll scare him away, because the Padre scares the daylights out of the dark side, right? And so I gave her this photograph of Padre Pio that I had, that my mother gave me, although I did see Padre Pio once. But she put it in a closet on the top part of not a closet, I'm not sure what you call this, but she had all the glasses and silverware in a sort of a cabinet. And it was a tall one, and it put it out of reach of the children and locked it, The next day, she called me, it disappeared. I just recently spoke to her again, and we've been in touch over the years. And I said, are you absolutely certain that this, because that's that's a pretty interesting thing that happened, dematerialization, again, a paranormal, strange phenomenon. But this time it looks like the bad spirit got the better of good intention, right? But I'll tell you about that ghost shortly, one other story that I have for you. So anyway, levitation, apports, striking, dematerialization. I just gave you an example. Unless my friend was lying to me, I don't believe that, not for 1 nanosecond. So these are some of the physical phenomena. Now, a third, and by the way, this is not the whole range, because I'd be able here all night, but the third example is materialization. We have stories of that in the Bible, right? Jesus makes food appear when it's needed for the poor. And in the Old Testament, there's this very strange story about manna from heaven, it was food. And it supposedly kept the Israelis, not the Israelis, the ancient Jews, I don't want to use that word Israeli, the ancient Jews for 40 years. That's what the Bible says. Of course, we don't have evidence for that other than the word of the Bible, but it is interesting that it's cited. as a form of materialization. Now, materialization is the most shocking because it seems to imply creation ex nihilo, or removal of something from one place and made manifest in another place. Difficult to describe what's going on. But it's certainly one of the more amazing phenomena. And I will just mention one example of a modern day materializer par excellence, and that is the Hindu visionary and master of yoga, Sai Baba. And Sai Baba, I happen to know a lot about Sai Baba because I knew two of my colleagues years ago. Both of them, unfortunately, maybe fortunately, who knows, are no longer with us. But both of them went to India and interviewed and studied Sai Baba and came back with stories. And I remember Carlos Osis, one of those gentlemen, showed me a ring that Sai Baba just pulled out of the air. Now you would say, oh, he's a magician. If you read the books about him, it doesn't look that way at all, that he was using trickery. And if he was, he sure knew how to get all kinds of stuff. One of the things that he did, and I interviewed two people that had this experience, that had pictures of him. Many people who were related to him or walked away with photographs or pictures of Sai Baba would report that vibhuti, or sacred ash, would come pouring out of them from time to time. And that was something that he did. He would produce ash, the sacred ash, at a moment's notice. I mean, again, he had sleeves that went all the way up to the top. Carlos and Erland are the two gentlemen that they searched him and everything. And he blew their minds with all kinds of really incredible stuff. So that's another form of materialization. I find that particularly shocking to my imagination. And it just tells us where it's so strange. You have to really do some heavy thinking to try to make sense of it. And I have not quite succeeded yet. So it's in the Bible. It's in the Hindu lore. In modern times, we have case histories. So that's this phenomenon of materialization, and there are all sorts of. I remember not that long ago, maybe about 5 or so years ago, witnessing in Astoria, Queens, there was a Saint Irene icon that started weeping, and they collected it, and it was tears, real tears. This is another thing that happened. There are paintings of the saints that bleed. For some reason, these are powerful, symbolically very powerful things, right? Blood, tears, tons of stories about these types of phenomena that, again, are bound to inspire skepticism in many people. But as far as I can make out from all the reading I've done, the studies and people I've interviewed, the stuff is for real. So, okay, so that's the third. Now, the fourth physical phenomenon is perhaps the most interesting. And that is that psychical research has collected, since its beginnings, actually, evidence for life after death. I mean, this would be a physical phenomenon, right? So there's various forms. Right nowadays we hear mainly about the near-death experience. That's because they're contemporary. And incidentally, I happen to know all of the founders of that. I wrote the first review of Raymond Moody's book. Raymond and I used to be buddies, and he was the funniest guy, and we used to hang out for hours and hours having the most amazing conversations. I haven't seen him for some years. He's still out there. Bruce Grayson and I live in the same town. He's one of the researchers. And this is an extraordinary phenomenon, the near-death experience. And it certainly convinces people who have the experience that there is some kind of life after death. I mean, I don't know. I think I know one case. An English atheist philosopher had a near-death experience which was unlike any that anyone else ever had. It was a complete bore. There was nothing to it. And he emerged, he said, this is nothing, but that's the only case I know on record. And if you watch YouTube, I'm tuned into YouTube all the time because they always have all kinds of near-death experiences report. Amazing stories. So I want to come back and tell you just that's not the only way that people survive death, right? There are apparitions, ghosts, and so forth. And okay, go back to my friend whose house was bothered by that ghost, and I tell you about the dematerialization. Well, I asked her, could I spend the night in your haunted house? And I felt it was my duty since she was my student and my friend. And she said, of course. So I spent the night in her house, and she put me on a couch with a cover, should I want to sleep. And she put me on a seat pointing toward an area of the house where this ghostly entity often appeared. Now, let me say this. 9 people in that house witnessed the ghost in one way or another. Okay. So I was thinking, maybe something's going to happen, but not living in the house, I didn't think it would be much of a deal. I didn't expect anything. So I'm sitting in the house, everyone's asleep, and I'm in a certain room where the ghost likes to show up. And I'm taking notes and reading, and I'm a late night bug anyway, so it was 2:00 in the morning. Silent. Suddenly I hear a gong ring. I look around, and up on the wall is a little drum with a stick. So, and it looks like it could create a gong sound. So I stand up, and I go and I pick it off the wall, and I hit it, and it's the same sound. At that moment, my friend comes downstairs. He says, what are you hitting the gong for? I woke her up. I said, I didn't hit it again. I think it's your buddy. Oh, she says, oh, yeah, he does stuff like that. And she goes right back upstairs. And I'm saying to myself, wow, this has not been a waste of time. I'm in the same room. How could that possibly have gonged by itself? But that's not the end. So I'm thinking to myself, very good, I've got a bit of evidence. So I sit back down and I start reading again. And I think I wrote it down. I was noting it down, what had happened. And I look up in the corner after no more than 15 minutes. Well, what do I see in the corner but a diaphanous, ghostly form of a man? And my mouth is open. I'm saying to myself, holy smoke. And it comes right to me and wraps itself around me and paralyzes me. And I want to scream, he's here. I can't do it. I can't do it, you see. But while I'm screaming, by the way, beyond terror, it was no terror. It was just like absolute thrilled. I'm thrilled because I'm being attacked by a ghost. And that's what I was there for. I mean, I couldn't get, it's not like just a look at it, a glance at him. The damn thing comes right at me. He was annoyed about the photograph I left, I think, and didn't like the idea that I kept telling everyone in that family to tell him to F off. that he's just a low-grade ghost and could get out of the house, you see. And so it lasted 2 seconds, okay, and disappeared. And I went back to writing my notes, and of course I told her in the morning. I didn't wake my friend and her family up. But so anybody that doubts ghosts, come and see me, because I know that they're real. I have other ghostly encounters, but less compelling than this. Okay. Well, so that is sort of how long have I been talking?
Almost an hour.
Almost an hour after. Okay.
See that?
So I think I've finished with what I wanted to say, and I'm hoping that we can just have some chit-chatting now, rather than again, I could go on. There are examples, but I think I've tried to suggest to you that let me just summarize again what I'm trying to do. We have all this data. It's real data illustrating unusual abilities of human beings, telepathy, physical things, all kinds of things that open up the world to us. But they come in brief manifestations and almost invariably unexpected. You never know when you're going to have a telepathic experience or a near-death experience and so on. My argument is that these phenomena are indications of our potential evolution. Extraordinary people, masters of spirituality like Joseph Cupertino and Jesus and Buddha and all the great saints and shamans and physical mediums. They don't have to be famous and great to be pretty good in this field. But these people are having these experiences. Why should we not all be able to learn how to do it? We're a scientific, the title of my book, Miracles in an Age of Disbelief. What happens if we take miracles and psychic phenomena seriously and do like a Manhattan Project? Remember the Manhattan Project, where they figured out how to create an atomic bomb so we could kill 40,000 Japanese in 1 second? Why not? And then the next day they did a couple more, another annihilation of thousands of lives. Do you know how much money right now America is investing, renewing our nuclear weaponry? We already have enough nuclear weapons to just dissolve the planet into nothingness. But a lot of people are making money, saying that's why it's done. So what I'm saying is, what we need is a new Manhattan Project to learn how to evolve our spiritual and inner capacities. If everybody had a touch of the empathic gift, the world would be a whole lot better off. And people do things because they're thoughtless. They're not thinking. They're caught up in a moment of passion. But we can evolve. We can evolve. We apparently have evolved from Neanderthals, but from what I'm learning, they may have been better than we were in some ways. But so how we can do this would be the greatest challenge of science. But nevertheless, I think that human beings have it in them to evolve to a new and greater stage of humanity. And the only reason why I entertain that possibility is because we know that the data is there. Some people can do it. We need to learn how to educate the whole of humanity and to develop these talents and skills. And so that's the gist of my message. I don't know. Am I crazy?
One of the things that you mentioned in your chapter on the statues and icons that either bled or had tears coming down.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned how we are, or at least Christians tend to be very focused on the crucifixion and how, and also I think you mentioned it when you talk about stigmata, which are the wounds of Christ that some people, not just saints, but some ordinary people also displayed when they were intensely focused on the crucifixion, you know, and the death. And you said, we focus so much on the crucifixion. What would happen if we focused that intently on the resurrection? What could happen, right?
Right.
I thought that was a great, I've always felt that, you know, and in the book, A Course in Miracles, which we've done, he says, why focus on the crucifixion? Focus on the resurrection. That was the more important, you know, miracle, right?
That's an important, I mean, everything depends on all the great psychics and masters of consciousness are excel in concentrating and focusing their own minds. You see, that's why it's so pathetic. This anti-material, or this pro-materialist stance doesn't allow you to even reflect on the possibilities of what you can do with your own mind.
Yeah.
Well, that's not quite fair because countless materialists are smart and do good things. I'm not judging. But if they opened up to the potential powers of the mind, who knows what we could accomplish?
And also technology, you know, cell phones and computers are shortening our attention span, you know, instead of increasing our ability to concentrate and focus. It seems that many people are going the other way. They're lessening it.
Absolutely. And becoming more and more passive, sitting in front of things. I mean, I appreciate some of the facets of the information accessibility. On the other hand, with the rise of AI, we don't know, the whole concept of truth is going to be challenged more and more.
Yeah.
Technology is a double-edged sword.
It is. It is. Well, as we increase our telepathic ability, we will rely less and less on technology, I would imagine.
Exactly. And I know I have this crazy fantasy of figuring out the energy entailed in the levitation phenomenon. If we could do that, you know, I was this morning. I went walking in my town. It's a beautiful town here in Charlottesville, beautiful hills and everything. But I noticed everywhere I looked, cars and huge, noisy, belching trucks. It suddenly just I felt loathing for this mechanistic crushing out of the consciousness and the spirit. It's ugly and stinking and dangerous. I mean, I find since I've been living in this town, when I first came here 20 years ago, people drove slowly and politely, so slowly and politely that it kind of turned me off because I was from New York, coming from New York. But I've noticed since I've been here now over a decade, they drive like maniacs, and I'm nervous driving. You know, I'm a very good driver. I've only had one little accident once, and but the people drive like crazy, and they don't seem to have much concern about you know, their own lives. So yeah, we have the means to explore new ways of living. You know, Antonio Guterres, the head honcho there at the UN.
Yeah.
He has said over and over again, we have to change the way we live to cope with the climate crisis that we're facing. And that's a philosophical challenge, you see. So as a philosopher, I feel I've got something to offer, namely a potential science for the transformation of human consciousness, which is what we need.
Yeah. And you include a quote from St. Augustine in your book where he said, miracles happen not in opposition to nature, but in opposition to what we know of nature. And we could say that of all paranormal phenomena, clairvoyance, automatic writing, channeling, energy healing, whatever, people think it's a violation of nature. It's not. It's just a violation of what we know of nature.
Perfect. Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, all the things that, science has progressed by admitting that they didn't know things and confronting things. But it'll happen eventually, I think.
Max Planck, one of the initial quantum physicists, he said, science progresses one funeral at a time.
Right. But I'm afraid that's not quite true when it comes to materialism, because it does have psychical research has been around at least it goes back to mesmerism. And goes back to, at least several hundred years. And there's always a minority of individuals, often very great. I mean, Freud wrote about the paranormal.
Yes.
Carl Jung did. Well, what a lot of people don't know is the English Frederick Myers, who is by far, a lot of people imagine that Freud discovered the unconscious. Nonsense. It's utter nonsense. He was a great man. I admire Freud. But Myers, long before Freud had discovered and was exploring the unconscious, and there's a wonderful book that's a history of the unconscious, goes back to ancient times. The insight was there. And Freud, of course, was a brilliant contributor to the history of the subject, although he was a little too obsessed with sex. By Jung cut and said, this is just, country stuff, man. Don't get too upset with that.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Padre Pio. One of the things that I had heard before, but not in as much detail, was that he had, in addition to all of his, miraculous abilities, such as bilocation, and, in Spiritism, I teach Spiritism. In Spiritism, they make a distinction between bilocation and bicorporeity. So bilocation is where you're having an out-of-body experience. You project yourself wherever you want to be. Right. Nobody can see you there, right? But you're there. You can see them, whatever. Bicorporeity is where you do the same thing, but you are visible.
Okay.
So the people can see you there. And he did both. He did a lot of both. And but he also had so much trouble with demons, whatever they were, right? You talk about it in your book, how in fact I made a note here of, let's see, page 91. This is just one account of this. A well-witnessed event, let me turn this light on. A well-witnessed event occurred in July 1964, because he died in 1968, was it? Maybe?
Roughly.
Somewhere around there. A possessed woman was dragged to San Giovanni, where he was. And when she saw Pio, she cried out in an unnaturally deep voice, "Pio, we will see you tonight." That night, the friars thought the house was struck by an earthquake. The superior rushed to Pio's room and found him on the floor bleeding from the head. Oddly, there was a pillow under his head. Pio explained that the Madonna put it there. In the morning, the possessed woman undergoing exorcism from another priest shrieked, "Last night I was up to see the old man. I hate him so much because he's a fountain of faith. I would have done more, except the lady in white stopped me."
Wow.
Yeah. And this account was based on eyewitnesses not disposed to sensationalism. Pio's face was so disfigured he was unable to appear in public for 5 days. I have seen photos of his face covered with welts and bruises. On another occasion, he was found with broken bones in his arms and legs. The attacks lasted throughout his long life. In 1918, he wrote, "I cannot describe to you how those wretched creatures were beating me. Several times I thought I was near death. Saturday, it seemed as if they really wanted to finish me." So it's very strange, right?
It absolutely is strange. Yeah.
I wonder what it makes me wonder, because he was such a good man, and he did so much healing. He did so much good for so many people.
Well, it could be, it's a little hard for us to believe and to entertain the idea that we do know that there are evil people. So if the spirit of a person survives death and that person was unresolved, died with those demonic instincts and hatred and all the rest, they may very well carry on from the next world and occasionally come down hard on someone that they're the direct opposite of that.
Yeah, exactly. To stop him because he was doing so much good, maybe.
I mean, people, there's resentment is a big thing in human life. People who are, or the instinct to vengeance, people feel that their lives have been somehow cheated, wrecked, despoiled, and they have to nurture within themselves horridly destructive feelings and intentions. We do know it happens. Crimes are committed. I hate to say it right now, just in the midst of our pleasant conversation. I mean, the world right now is full of diabolically hateful people doing things that are, I don't know how many wars are taking place right now. About 24 on the planet. Small ones, big ones, millions of people being tormented in different parts of the world. There's an awful lot of horrific ill will abroad on this planet. And to me, this is a disease of consciousness. That's why it's the inner self that has to be touched and changed. And it's a struggle. It's an ongoing struggle.
Yeah.
So someone like Padre Pio gets targeted, apparently.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a mystery, a horrible.
Yeah. Well, there is something you commented in your book. I have a quote here. One point I want to make about demons in quotes. All right, demons in quotes. And the project of higher evolution, it does appear as a matter of psychological fact that in the quest for the highest states, one often encounters agents of opposition who have to be dealt with.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it happens in dreams too.
Mm-hmm.
I had a dream once about Hitler, and the person who I learned so much about dream work from, Jeremy Taylor, when I mentioned that to him, he said, the Hitler dream, which I didn't realize was a thing, but evidently it is a thing.
Wow.
He said the Hitler dream comes to people who want to make the world a better place, who really want to help. And they have to face this biggest shadow because it's kind of commensurate with their desire is maybe very big too, and so they have to encounter that level of shadow, and yeah, it's interesting.
It's very interesting, and I have noticed in myself that every now and then, as I'm rising in spirit, moments of creativity or joy, that there's something there that wants to stop me. I have to fight it. I have to. There are a number of really peculiar things that it's not worth talking about. I mean, it's not horrifying, but that stuff goes into my mind that are completely absurd, and it's an involuntary surfacing of ideas that seem designed to screw me up, to stand in the way, to obstruct me.
Yeah.
So when that happens,
so we have spirit guides, and we also have, spirits who want to stop us or to interfere with, the good that we want to do sometimes.
Yeah, it seems that way. And it seems that, life is a struggle. It's a battle. And it has its high moments, its conquests, and it's never resolved completely. And so, yeah.
Well, it's a matter of where we put our attention. We can withdraw our attention from the, if we observe it and realize that what it is, whatever we want to think of it as, we can think of it as a part of our own mental resistance to, growth or whatever, or we can think of it as an outside entity or whatever. Doesn't matter. If we withdraw our attention from it, we don't give it power.
Right. And there is one thing I have learned with practice when I get something gets in the way psychologically. And it's pretty simple. It's breathing. And I am a big fan of breath control, pranayama. And I'm trying to make that a part of my practice, because from time to time I'm assaulted, not by the outside, something inside me, and I recognize it as such. Sometimes I talk to it, I tell it, get out of here, and other times if it grips me. There are physical things I can do, and one of them is to hyperventilate in a slow, controlled fashion. And almost immediately, just the other day, as a matter of fact, I'm trying to remember what led me to this mental state that. I know what it was. It was listening to the news on the radio.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Things that are happening out there are, I'll be perfectly frank, I don't think I've ever been so angry in my entire life. And I don't like being angry. And I'm distracted. Even this morning, while I was preparing to have this wonderful conversation with you, I had to struggle because I flicked on some news stuff, and I heard some stories of things that were just horrifying and outraging me. And I had to struggle to get control of myself. And I did, you see. So, yeah, we have to learn how to, if we want to evolve spiritually and psychically, we do have to take this into consideration. I appreciate you bringing it up.
Yeah, because it's fear and, the negative emotions that hold us back from this evolution that you're talking about, evolving our spiritual faculties, so to speak, or, paranormal abilities. In fact, I thought I had written something about that from your book. I'll try to find it because don't know where it is, but it was about what impedes our efforts in this direction, and it was fear and beliefs, I think. Oh dear, I lost.
I think what I said. I mean, it could have been a number of things, but but you're right. It's a struggle. It's a battle.
Yeah.
Not all of the time, thank goodness.
Yeah.
We have to have, the government spends billions and billions of dollars on building up a nuclear weaponry defense systems, they call it. We need our own spiritual and psychic defense systems. They don't cost anything. Right. Other than mental effort, right? Mental effort, mental awareness. And that's something that we can give each other in our companionship and community. And we don't need billions of dollars for it. We need billions of dollars to destroy the world, not to transform it in a positive way.
Right. Could you talk a little bit about, you talk about the subliminal mind, and I wondered if there's a difference between the subliminal mind and Carl Jung's personal unconscious, or are they the same thing?
Oh, well, subliminal is a term that Myers used. Jung's personal unconscious, of course, was the deeper level would be the collective unconscious.
Yeah.
So the subliminal mind, the way Myers used it, and the way I use it, includes both. In other words, whatever is not within the grasp of our conscious selves. Okay. And we don't even know the layers. The more I study the mind, the more I realize, the more I'm inclined to postulate different levels. One of the most compelling ideas that has been occupying my mind lately is the near-death experience, which seems to have the ability to really open up the deeps of the mind. And my question has been, how is it possible? Can we figure out ways of opening up ourselves to the deep levels of the subliminal or subconscious, the creative subconscious, deliberately, without having to confront, be dead, but you actually have a near-death experience. And of course, the yogis and mystics do by withdrawing their attention from the external world.
Yeah, and meditation.
Right, and fasting and mastering their impulses, their appetites. And in a way, that's a kind of dying. But dying to the external distracting world.
Yeah.
But it's a very difficult thing to do, especially in our current world where there's so much information pouring at us. I have recently I'm making an effort to just turn my consciousness off the news, the so-called news, because it's so horrific and so full of, I don't want to use a bad word here, baloney, shall we say, that it angers me. Yeah. Or see something that is so hideous that I can't do anything. It just makes me frustrated and sad or
Mhm.
angry. So I'm trying to isolate myself from that.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I quite
I
frankly,
like, there's this priest called Richard Rohr. He's written a lot of books.
uh-huh.
And he says, I watch the news to see who I need to pray for.
That's a beautiful thought. That's a,
That is, it is. It made such an impression on me when I heard him say that on a podcast. Because I thought if we pray for all these people who are doing all these terrible things and
right.
who enrage us, with what they're doing, but instead of indulging in the enraging, instead of indulging in the anger, let's just pray for them, bless them, and hope that they can get better. Uh,
And
yeah,
that is the way to go,
yeah,
and that's why I try to avoid it because it's very hard for me to bless somebody or pray
hmm
for people that I see doing things that are so outrageous. But you're
yeah,
right; it doesn't help
yeah,
to add your anger and your wrath. And I'll be perfectly honest. You would be terrified if you heard some of the fantasies I've had but I've never committed. I've never even held a gun in my hand. Okay.
hmm
And but the thoughts that run through my mind sometimes, particularly of late, I'm almost afraid to share with anybody, and I'm afraid to think them myself. But again, just to be clear, I'm not. I'm in control of myself. But
yeah,
sometimes you can't help
yeah.
thoughts and attitudes and feelings arising and in you, and so it takes a discipline. You have to have some discipline to live a decent life, at least.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love the chapter that you have in living a miracle. Is that what
Living
you?
by miracle. That's
Yeah, living by miracles. Yes. And
close.
it reminded me of this quote of Einstein's where he says, "Do you believe in miracles? Well, you should. In fact, life itself is a big miracle. There are so many things that are beyond our understanding. There are two ways to live. You can live as if nothing is a miracle. You can live as if everything is a miracle."
Beautiful,
Yeah,
beautiful.
that was Einstein, Albert Einstein.
Oh, great
So I
man.
love the idea of living by miracle.
Yeah, yeah.
And in your book, you suggest four variables conducive to living by miracles, and they are calm conviction, deep introversion, unrelenting focus, and relaxed spontaneity. And those are fantastic techniques, fantastic ability. We all have those abilities, but do we give them attention? Do we give them time? But that's what living by miracle. So, yeah.
Thank you for reminding me what I wrote. I should start practicing more.
Well, we all need to. Well,
Sure.
that's what's so beautiful about your book. There's so much that inspires. And I didn't mean to turn it into, talking about demons, but I really was curious about that with Padre Pio.
Yeah.
There's also that beautiful healing story about, well, there were actually several that he affected, and one of them was the woman with no eyes, like her
Oh,
pupils were gone. Remember that, Gemma?
yeah, Gemma, right.
Yeah,
Galgani, last name. Absolutely. That's really something. I mean, that she's still technically blind, but she sees.
yeah.
I
She
mean,
has no pupils. She has no
right,
pupils, but
right,
he healed her so
right,
that she still has no pupils, but she
right,
can see.
right, right.
Yeah, that's
That
amazing.
that is an amazing story, and if anything, counts as a miracle.
Yeah, for
Just
sure.
just counter ordinary reality that's
Hmm.
possible.
Hmm.
Uh, I can tell you my story of, I had the experience of seeing him in the flesh, Padre Pio.
Mm-hmm.
This was my first time I went to Europe, and it was in the late 60s, and I was a graduate student at Columbia University. And I think that was the first I used to go then every summer. I would go off to Europe. This was the first time I went, and I knew about Padre Pio because my mom and my brother had stories to tell about him. So I decided to go, and I met Mary Pyle. She was a woman an American, who from a wealthy family who was a devotee of the Padre, and she told me that I could see the Padre, I could meet him. She would introduce him to me. It scared the daylights out of me, to be honest. Right? I wasn't. I was just a young guy traveling, and I wanted to see that. I was curious, but I knew he was a powerful personality. And I didn't go to mass in the morning because it was very early. But not only that, I had the weirdest dreams that night. I dreamt that I was in a big church and the cross had fallen across the aisle, approaching the altar. And I took that as a sign that I'm supposed to lift the cross or pick up the cross. And I'm telling you, the dreams were weird.
Mm.
So I woke up and I didn't go to mass, but that afternoon I was told where the Padre would appear on a certain balcony to give blessings to people. So I went to that in the afternoon, and I was standing to the right, and to my left was a bunch of Italian women who were screaming at the Padre in Italian. You know, they were trying to get attention. And he was on the balcony looking down at them. And then he turned around after he had blessed them, and I'm over here, this part of the floor, looking up, and just watching this. So he turns his back and starts to walk away, and then he stops after about 10 steps, and he starts to turn on the side where I am, and he turns halfway to look at me. He stops. And then he turns back and walks away. It was as though he had an impulse to see me, say something to me, register me, convey to me. I don't know what it was. But it left a permanent impression on me. I've always wondered. I told the story to a friend of mine who is a very religious philosopher. And he gave me a nice interpretation. He said he recognized you, that you were on your own path, and he was leaving you alone. Way. I thought that was kind of nice. I mean, yeah. I mean, it wasn't that I was some kind of a devil and I had committed crimes that I was going to be caught. Just a regular guy, by no means a holy guy, and just a normal person. But I'll never forget that experience, And then this story, my brother, who was 10 years older than me and now in heaven, I hope, he was like me. We were both independent. My mom was very spiritual and practicing Catholic. But my brother and I were like explorers and open-minded, not very religious. But my brother, when he was living in the Bronx, had an experience in which in one room of his house, of his apartment, there was an overwhelming odor of perfume. And he didn't know much about Padre Pio. So he went down to the woman who lived below and he said, are you using some kind of weird perfume? It's going up into my room. She looks and she says, I never use perfume. And then my brother pointed out that it was only in the one room. When you opened the door, it did not diffuse into the air. It was just locked in that one room. So he goes home and visits Mom, who's our expert on these things, and tells the story. And then my mother told him. that's Padre Pio paying you a visit.
Yeah, because he had that odor of sanctity, they call it.
Yeah, the order of sanctity. And
Right.
eventually, my brother went back to the church and used to go to and went to mass and everything. But he didn't change that much. He was still, when he died, I went to his funeral at church that he went to, and the priest was cracking jokes about my brother, saying, it was a sweet, loving thing, but he was always arguing about the Pope living too, criticizing. And my brother was more religious in a way than other people were, but so I have that experience that, and my brother never once tried to change my mind. And when he was dying, he read my book on life after death and said it was a big help.
Oh, wonderful.
But of course, I love my brother and I love Padre Pio. I just can't, go back to church. I don't feel the need. To me, God is everywhere. And
I don't think God cares if we go to church because it's really what's in our heart.
Yeah, that's how I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we can make anywhere church if we want to.
But I mean, discipline and things are good. I mean, some of these things, I remember whenever I went to confession, it wasn't that I had a great deal of horrible things to confess, but when I walked out, I always felt lighter.
Mm.
Felt a kind of an airy quality. But then I outgrew that and went to, New York, Columbia University, hung out with all kinds of people. But I've never lost my sensitivity and love of the entire dimension of spirituality, and I'm still working.
Oh yeah, that's a never-ending job, right? Okay, I'd like to open it up to our friends in the audience if they have any questions, so that give them a chance. So anybody have a question or a comment that you'd like to pose? No, I still have more.
No? Nobody?
Anybody have something?
I don't have a question, but I'm very much enjoying your guys' commentary. So if you have more questions, Gloria, I'd love to hear them.
Okay.
Hi.
Susan?
I have I guess a comment. I think it's what you describe maybe as the psychic phenomena. I'm not certain. But I grew up in Flushing, Queens, and the town next door to us is Jamaica, Queens. And my sister, one of my sisters in high school, she told me when she woke up, she had a dream that there was a volcano in Jamaica. And then we heard on the news that night, there was a major gas explosion in Jamaica. I mean, a really big kind of devastating one. So I think that was like she was having a psychic experience.
Yeah. Precognitive dream.
Yeah. Really. That I've had a number of like that. They're a little less compelling than when you have 3 dreams in a row that really pile up. But no, for sure, that sounds like she picked something up. And you wonder why. Why does it pick up an event?
I don't know. I think, we slept in the same room and, I didn't have this dream. She's 3 years younger than me.
Yeah.
I thought it was kind of interesting.
Very interesting, yeah. And it would have some kind of meaning for her too, because there's so many things that go on, so many things that happen. Why did I dream of that one? What does it symbolize in my life? Some kind of creative power, some kind of, who knows? I mean, I would have to know the dream in the context of it, but yeah, I think that we have precognitive dreams. We don't know they're precognitive until the thing happens, right?
Yeah.
But in the meantime, we also have there's a personal meaning as well as, the social or societal meaning. There's always a personal meaning also. Why did my unconscious pick that event to dream about,
Well, what can I ask her about it? I don't know if she'll remember the dream. I mean, we haven't talked about it in 40 or 50 years, but what could I ask her about it? To get more insight if she remembers.
Yeah. Do you want to answer that, Michael?
Yeah. I think the person who asked the question has the answer already. In other words, I would ask her if she remembered, or was there any after effect or any connection with that dream to some aspect of her life. And
look at it symbolically, right?
Yeah. Okay.
But also, if I might say, I often ask myself, why have I had so many psychic phenomena? And part of it, the answer that I've given myself is that just so that I could know that the stuff is real, and I can then, in my role as a teacher and as a writer, send it out. In other words, use that information to instruct and inspire and help other people. So it could have simply been that she was in an open state at that moment, and that she should maybe just regard that as a nice little gift, reminding her of a secret or hidden capacity that she has. That's one way that I would interpret it, you see. Others might simply react with fear or repulsion, or might even deny, because they don't want to have that encounter. Probably your sister is not that type of person.
Yeah, she's on the open side.
Yeah.
That's Carol, Gloria. Yeah,
Which
sister,
one?
That's Carol, my sister.
Oh, Carol. Oh, yeah. I remember Carol. I wanted to ask you if you could elaborate a little bit about the axial age parallels to our times. I know you mentioned the axial age, and I've read about this one or two other places, but just very briefly, and it's always really interested me because it was a time where many of the most prominent spiritual leaders of the world came about, like Buddha and Jesus and Confucius, right?
Yeah, well, that I'm trying to think. I know it was a German philosopher who came up with that concept.
Yes, yes.
And I haven't quite got it right now, but I think all he meant to say, I've thought about that too, and I wonder if there would be another new axial age all the time. It's something I wonder. I think we may be on now.
Well, that's the implication that I got.
Yeah. But I mean, that was just a sort of a label. There seems to have been a moment in human history when all over the world there was a spontaneous awakening things, and the basis of many of the great religions. And there's been we have the Renaissance, we have periods of history where different aspects of human reality have flowered, as it were. I mean, the 18th century was the age of enlightenment, the rational enlightenment, and many of these philosophers and thinkers of the 18th century believed that they were evoking or articulating an age that was going to open, the rational mind to the whole planet, and we were going to progress it, but they were wrong. I mean, a lot of good things come out of it, a lot of good things, but
a lot of good things like democracy and and also, the scientism and materialism and
exactly, yeah, and clearly the human race is, has not followed the rationalistic enlightenment, but we need it. But it's only part of the story.
Yeah.
And as far as democracy, it's a tricky thing. If you can keep it, well, who is it? One of the great founders said that, Benjamin Franklin. We've got a great democracy if we can keep it, he said.
Ah, yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, so in your chapter on beyond physicalism, you wrote, it would be a mistake to assume that a talent for miracle making is only possible if you're a morally impeccable person. Although it is true that much of the most powerful evidence for the paranormal is associated with people noted for heroic degrees of selflessness, like Joan of Arc, Milarepa, and Arrigo. And I was wondering, I totally agree with that premise. And I'm curious about what you know about Arrigo, the Brazilian healer.
Oh, Arrigo, yeah.
Yeah.
I've done a couple of paintings of him.
Really?
Yeah. I have. There's one terrific book by an American investigator.
Yeah, Surgeon with the Rusty Knife.
Right. Well,
yes.
He had this strange ability to, first of all, he healed people all day, constantly, free. The poor and the most exalted personalities in the culture, including the president at that time, came to him, and he would, if he had to form some kind of an operation, he'd take a penknife out of his dirty pocket and stick it in, and they would feel nothing and instantly healed. And put his dirty nose, aside.
He could,
totally contradicts everything that we expect is possible.
Well, he didn't do it himself. He channeled a spirit,
right.
Dr. Fritz,
right,
who had been a surgeon in World War I.
Correct.
And,
that's what he said, but we don't know. Fritz,
because Arrigo had no medical training.
Exactly.
Yeah,
None.
he didn't know anything about medicine. I love that book. I love his story. And one of the things that really impressed me was at one point, the guy who's writing the book, he was spent a lot of time in Brazil with him. In fact, he had him operate on his arm because he had a tumor on his forearm that the American surgeons wouldn't touch because they said it was in a very dangerous place and he could lose the movement of his arm. And so he couldn't believe what he was seeing as a medical researcher. He was a surgeon himself. Right. And he said he couldn't believe what he was seeing. And he thought maybe it was some kind of hypnosis, because how could anybody, do surgery without any anesthetic, without any antiseptic, and the person feels no pain, and he's actually, you could see the skin would open and he would pull out a tumor or whatever. And so at one point he's standing next to Arrigo, watching, this surgery take place on this woman's eye. And he starts the incision, and then he hands the knife to the researcher and he says, finish the incision. And of course the researcher knows how, because he is a surgeon, but he's horrified at the thought of doing this without antiseptic and anesthetic. But he had seen enough by that time, and he had him operate on his arm, and he took out that tumor in seconds and just closed up. He would just put his hand over the incision and it would close, and there's pictures before and after. And he, so he had seen enough by then to trust this process. So he accepts the knife and he goes to finish the incision on this woman's eye. And he says, as the blade went toward the tissue, he said there was a cushion of air, like when you try to put two magnets together and they won't go together.
Uh-huh.
So there was a cushion of air between the blade and the tissue, so that when he did this, the cells just parted.
Wow.
So that's why there was no blood. When he would do these incisions, there was no blood because he wasn't cutting through anything. It was still energetic. You see, the blade didn't actually pierce through the cells. And so when so the cells would just part, and then he could do whatever he had to do, and then he would just put his hand over it and it would close.
Right.
And it's really quite interesting.
Really, indeed.
Yeah.
It's on a level with the Deruta story that I told her earlier. I mean, with Deruta, I mean, everything happened instantly. There was nothing, no touching or no knives used, but the Arago story is even more fantastic, that he's using the way he does it. That's it. And then he had a dream. He knew he was going to die, and you must know because you know the book. And, motorcycle crash or something like that. Car crash.
Car crash.
Yeah.
He was driving.
And you wonder that he kind of knew it was coming, and yet he couldn't save himself. So that's bizarre.
No, he knew that's how it was going to be. I had a spiritual teacher in my youth who also told us he was going to die in a plane crash, and he did.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So there are people, who know these things,
Oh, yeah, a lot of people know when they're going to die.
Yeah. He had an ashram. I lived in his ashram for 2.5 years up in the Catskill Mountains. His name was Rudy. He was quite something. In fact, there were several places in your book where I said in the margin I would put, "Oh, just like Rudy," because he was one of these people like Padre Pio who could read. Everyone was an open book to him. When he met you for the first time, he knew your history. He knew what was going on in your life, and he might comment on it, if he felt that you needed to hear something, he would just say it.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Wow. I remember he met this couple one time. He had an Oriental art business in New York City in the Lower East Side or Lower West Side. I can't remember now. And he would sell all this Oriental art. And this couple came in with their decorator, very well-to-do couple with a place on Park Avenue. And he took the husband aside and he said, "You have to stop cheating on your wife. This is really eating you up. And it's also bad for her." And he had never met these people before. And the guy was so impressed and amazed that he took him back to his wife and he says, "Tell her." And he confessed everything and, changed his life. I don't know what happened after that, but it was, he had a kind of a conversion experience in a sense, where, so Rudy was quite unusual. Well, let's see. Do I have anybody have a last question or comment before we conclude? Because we're almost out of time here. The other thing about the axial age is that it was preceded by a lot of violence. Like it was a violent time in the world. And I remember reading somewhere where there was an increase in, there was new methods of travel. They had advanced quite a bit in I don't know, ships, must have been ships, navigation or whatever, so that there was a tremendous increase in travel, which and intermingling of cultures, which brought about conflicts as well as trade, and so it kind of parallels our time where we have a tremendous amount of violence, and we also have this technology that has brought us closer together in a sense, in terms of communication. So I don't know. So I'm hoping that there's going to be an axial age of spiritual flourishing, that we're leading up to.
Yeah, the technology. I'm not sure if I want to terminate my last words about what's happening in the world today, but we are able to we're witnessing certain things today, let's say the past 7 months to be exact, that are unprecedented and, well, maybe not unprecedented, precedented horrors, precedent horrors, but for the first time, the whole world is watching what's going on. And that's unusual. That is something that is unheard of and novel. So maybe a new axial age after all.
I like the thought.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's a positive note to end on. You mentioned Frederick Myers a lot in this book, and his observation that, quote, love is a kind of exalted but unspecialized telepathy, the simplest and most universal expression of that mutual gravitation of kinship of spirits. I thought that was a beautiful.
It is beautiful.
Quote.
And
yeah.
That would have been nice if I had remembered it when I talked about, it's the high point of telepathy, so to speak.
Yes.
See that. That is a beautiful phrase and phrasing. Thank you for ending on that note.
Well, thank you.
Do you mind repeating that beautiful note?
Sure. Frederick Myers said, love is a kind of exalted but unspecialized telepathy, the simplest and most universal expression of that mutual gravitation or kinship of spirits. Yeah, and I see love as the basis of who we are at our highest level, right? As well as the creative power of the cosmos. Right. So, yeah.
All right.
Well, thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for this book, and thank you for sharing your time with us and your expertise. It's been wonderful talking to you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you all who attended.
If you're listening, good night. Take care.
Good night.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.